Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 19, Part 7, A Rhetorical Petard. Kasler did not like making decisions while angry. He had an almost reflexive habit of pushing off, saying or doing anything while angry until he'd been able to calm down. Usually this led to better courses of action, although he'd had a few times where he decided much later that the course he'd have taken when angry would have been best. He looked out over the chamber and saw most ambassadors had stood. They shouted, shook their fists, and stomped their feet. That little Zoltan weasel had managed to prevent the testimony about forced indentureships after the first hint of it, and no one had really believed that Zoltans would go that far. No, not true. No one had wanted to believe it, so they let the prohibition stand. Now, however, they'd been forced to stare the reality of it in the face, and they were furious, partly because it had happened, and partly because they'd nearly been hoodwinked into turning a blind eye to it. He'd almost turned a blind eye to it. The thought brought a tinge of red to the edges of his vision. To the hells with it, this cannot be allowed to stand. He looked down his nose at Ambassador Gerfnan and allowed some of his fury into his voice. I'm going to go a step further and, in light of recorded evidence, level charges of crimes against the League. Forced indentureship is a form of slavery and is expressly forbidden by the League Charter. Silence fell across the chamber as his words sunk in. That sort of charge could lead to the Yultans being declared a rogue state, which would bring the Venter into the war, as well as the Council forces. He wanted to do it so bad he could taste the ozone from the blast of fire. His sister would even support him if he did. Words flashed across his contact. Euro, I know you want to, love. It would be satisfying to bring our military and the Council forces into the war, but you know you can't. And I know you aren't planning to, so you can save the look you were about to give me. I know you, my love, and I know you need a reason to step back from that precipice, so here it is. Bringing everyone else into the war won't help the poor souls who have been taken into slavery, but the right proposal here will. Kasler fought the red back from his vision and put his hand behind his back to signal, you're right to Euro. Plan B it is then. Therefore, I am going to add a fifth vote for penalties to this session. All non-Zoltan indentures currently serving in the Zoltan Republic, or on predominantly Zoltan ships, or whose contracts are held by any Zoltan concern, public or private, shall be immediately released from their contracts and paid an amount of either double the standard rate for an indentureship contract, or double the individual salary before being indentured, whichever is greater. Furthermore, all such individuals shall be returned to non-Zoltan space by the most expeditious methods possible. Any indenture who wishes to return to their service will be free to sign a new contract with the Zoltan, of course, after they have been safely returned to the nearest non-Zoltan world. Kasler paused, allowing the enormity of what he had just proposed to sink in. Such things had been done before, of course, most notably when the avian Wiana had been caught taking slaves in pirate raids and forcing them to sign indentureship contracts. It had been a long time since that had happened though, and few remembered it. He did, so did Euro. It only took a moment for her to realize his intent and start flashing relevant text from the resolution against the Wiana upon his contacts. He started reading as fast as he could while he let the pause drag out. After a few minutes, he continued. Of course, this sort of assault on the liberty of the League citizens, and even the very charter by which it was founded, has happened before, and a similar proposal to what I just laid out was drafted. It was found, however, that even that didn't have enough teeth. Several owners forged documents and did other things to try and hold on to their slave. Therefore, I believe we must include some extreme measures in these sanctions. Specifically, that any holder of indentured servants who does not follow the strictures outlined shall be fined the entirety of his or her fortune and be incarcerated for the rest of their natural life without the possibility of parole, with the fine levied against them going to whatever indentures they manage to hold on to despite attempts to enforce these orders. Grumbles and cheers floated up to him from various members of the council, and a quick look around found that individual responses had more to do with how heavily the ambassador in question endorsed indentureship than whether they sided with the humans or the exaltans. Thankfully, most of those siding with humanity have no great love for the entire indentureship concept, however, so we shouldn't lose many votes there. And the only pro-indentureship sorts who are likely to vote against this are the ones who wish to bring full-fledged slavery back. So I expect this proposal to pass, and the logistical nightmare it is going to cause the Alton should hinder their war efforts for months. Also, proposing that the Venter take on the burden of overseeing the effort signals that we will be staying out of the war, but only as long as the resolution's dictates are followed. I will further put forth that Fatharan Empire be put in charge of seeing to it this resolution, if it passes, is followed, and to aid with the inevitable logistical issues which will arise from it. That brought all of the side conversations to a halt, and seemed a little unpopular with some of humanity's allies, specifically the ones that tended to be a little slow on the uptake. No matter. Time to press his advantage. My good gentles, thank you for your ears and your patience today. These are weighty matters, and they have been discussed at length. I do believe it is time to call for a vote. Do I have a second? His board instantly lit up with seconds and thirds in favor of voting for all 5 proposals. I think I caused a race to hit the button. Very well. Thank you all. I will work backwards through the proposals. That way, we can put the one which will require a secondary vote last. So, on the 5th proposal, that all indentureships held by members of the Alton Republic shall, from this point forward, have their contracts considered fulfilled, with special remuneration to be provided. He checked his display and found that Euro and the legal team at the embassy had come through. The specific language for the proposal was all there. The specific language for the proposal, and its details, is being forwarded to you now. You will note Appendix B, which allows for the proposal to be pushed back to the floor in 3 days if a detailed reading of the proposal is found objectionable by enough ambassadors or their governments. The board lit up immediately and came down overwhelmingly in favor of the sanctions. Henry, again wisely, abstained. So did the Arabso and the Thermerk. The only real surprise to him came from the Baitha, who voted in favor rather than abstaining. I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised. Those guys really are a principled lot, even if so many think them feckless because their own independent streak leaves them mostly uninterested in council affairs. But that same streak makes them hate the entire indentureship concept. Very well, the proposal carries. Next, the vote to... Caslaw put his mouth on autopilot, calling for each of the votes and recording the results. He considered turning the matter over to Enable, but knew he needed to be seen doing this. The votes to censure the military commanders, force the withdrawal of military forces from the non-involved systems, call for Zoltan reparations to the same, and censure the Republic, its Prime Minister, and its Ambassador, all passed with plenty of margin. Then came the last 2 votes, the ones Kasler needed the most. Thank you, again my fellow sapiens, for your patience through all of the arguments presented today. I believe it speaks to the best principles of this league, and the values put forth at its founding, that the votes so far have been so strongly in favor of the necessary measures. Now, however, we get to an unprecedented event in the history of our league. The office of the Prime Minister must be stripped of the command of the Joint League military, and another must be appointed to stand in his place. You have all read the relevant passages of the League Charter and heard the arguments against the Prime Minister's office, and the Sultan Ambassador's arguments that the Charter does not give this body the right to take this step. I will reiterate the primary point so elegantly made by the Penigra Ambassador, and remind all of you that the Penigra are one of the founding species of this league, and our ambassador can trace his lineage back to those who actually helped write the document. Kasler managed just to keep from gritting his teeth as he said the last words. He believed firmly that one's own deeds should determine their merit, but he'd take any argument he could get at this point. I hate politics so much. The language in that section is quite verbose, but also very specific, and claim that they do not authorize exactly the sort of vote we are about to take is to try to claim that the words mean something other than what they clearly state. I will say one thing further, which is to restate the Sultan Ambassador's long, rhetorically dense speech in a few simple words. The Exalted Republic does not like that section of the Charter, and feel that it was snuck into the document without their realizing quite what it meant, and feel that they were forced into letting it be there in order to get the Pinigra to sign on. A lot of mumbles and grumbles sounded through the chamber at that. He'd broken one of the unspoken rules of the council chamber. Do not boil down an opponent's arguments. If someone is going to make a ridiculous point, but is able to make it sound good, you should respond in kind, not come out and boldly state the fact that the entire argument is well-dressed hogwash. There is time for that sort of thing, of course, but the middle of a war, isn't it? Then again, the sultans break the rule when it suits them, and I do love hoisting them on their own petards. They have so many of them. I can see the indignation some of you feel at my remark, and know that I do not make such a claim lightly. And you, my dear Jeffernan, can stop trying to take the floor. If you wish to dispute my claim, I will be happy to delay the vote until after I have published a full rhetorical analysis of your argument in written form, and then we can dispute what parts of it I am misrepresenting. Another round of grumbles from the chamber as the Zoltan scales laid back all across his body, and his tail nearly slapped the floor. The man then seemed to gather himself, wave a hand somewhat dismissively, and sit.